All right, this week on the latest episode of Keeping It Real with Film Gordon, the fourth installment of the John Wick franchise opens in theaters this weekend, and we'll discuss the best sequels in movie history. From Lord of the Rings, James Bond, to The Godfather, sequels have represented continuity and big bucks for film studios, and we'll look at some of our favorites. Plus, veteran producer Victoria Alonso was fired from Marvel, and her exit sent shockwaves throughout the industry. We discussed at length on this show the problems of the past couple of years from the MCU. Do we see her as part of the problem, or is her separation seen as a possible solution? Also, baseball season is around the corner, and there's a new Amazon documentary, Mr. October, simply titled Reggie. We'll discuss that as well as the aforementioned John Wick Chapter 4 on episode 531, Keeping It Real with Film Gordon. Let's go. All right, and welcome to the latest episode of Keeping It Real with Film Gordon. I am Tim Gordon. Charles Kirkland Jr. is joining me, our co-host with the mostest. Charles, what's going on, my brother?
What's up, Tim? I'm so happy to be here again to jump into this fray with you and talk about some very interesting stuff.
Well, I mean, we got a lot of stuff going on, and we got potentially a bunch of different people, man, that may be checking in during the hour. Wilson Morales, Lenita Cook, Travis Hobson. So there's a murderer's row today as we're working back on week 2 of the new technology here in the studio, trying to make all this stuff work. So, hey, Charles, I don't know what to tell you, man. I just kind of do what I do, man, and just take it from there, man. So, what about you? How you feeling this week?
Man, it's the weather is nice now. I'm just happy to be alive. This is a good week with John Wick coming out this week.
It is indeed,
excited.
man. It is indeed. All right, man. Well, before we get to John Wick, man, we got a lot of ground to cover, man. You heard me on the top talking about we're going to look at the best sequels in movie history. So that's coming up a little later on in the show. But I did want to start off with a major change in the Marvel Cinematic Universe that occurred earlier this week. Executive producer Victoria Alonso was terminated. And while the cause is unclear, sources have said that the decision was made by a consortium, including human resources at Disney, Disney's legal department, and multiple executives, including Disney Entertainment co-chairman Alan Bergman, to whom all Marvel Studio reports. Alonso's longtime boss, Kevin Feige, felt mired in an impossible situation, it was said. He did not intervene, and she felt blindsided. Now, of course, Charles, Alonso joined Marvel 2006, 3 years before Disney acquired them for $4 billion. And over the last 17 years, she's been a fixture. We've seen her name on every film from the MCU, including Ant-Man, Quantumania, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. I think, Charles, that part of what the issue was, and we'll talk about that in a second, was that Marvel, during the pandemic in 2021 and 2022, and you and I have talked about this ad nauseum, they had 17 titles in those 2 years alone, 7 movies, 8 streaming series, and 2 TV specials over 23 months, right? So that's a lot of content to be produced. And that breakneck distribution schedule, a product of the pandemic and a need to constantly feed Disney Plus, was not Alonso's making, but it was her job, Charles, to get each of those titles through Marvel's post-production process, which has been described as gargantuan. Now, by the summer of 2022, they say cracks begin to show in the company's seemingly impervious armor. And a lot of this came to a head, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, or several weeks ago, when Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania dropped, that despite the fact that it was finished a year earlier, there were lots of criticisms from critics such as ourselves for generic visual effects. And it looked very flat and cruddy, the way it was described. Now, also, the reviews, as you know, were not good. The movie's only made $463 million to date, the worst performance of any film in the Ant-Man franchise, and it's going to struggle to break even, Charles. So having all the information I just gave you, give me your best read on what you think actually occurred between this split with Victoria Alonso and Marvel in the MCU.
Well, first, I'm going to say Victoria Alonso has been around Marvel. I mean, she was an executive producer on the first Iron Man. So she's been here for a while. She's done this. And I think it's kind of, if they're laying all this at the feet of the visual effects department, I think Marvel is missing the point. The reason why Ant-Man and the Quantumania did so poorly was because it was a bad film. It didn't have to do with special effects. The story itself was bad. And if you turn in a bad story, I don't care what kind of visual effects you have, it's not going to work. And especially after this time when there's been so much going on with Marvel, so many Marvel movies, the bar has been raised, I guess you could say. But I don't think it's the fault, and I don't think if you ask anyone else, I don't think the fault was visual effects that made this movie bomb. And so to lay this at her feet, I think is kind of scapegoating her into what some people may say an impossible position, like Feige said. I believe, yeah, there may have been some flaws in the visual effects department, but I think that was more of the fault of Marvel just making too much stuff that the visual effects department couldn't keep up. So I don't want to say that it's. I'm definitely going to say that it's not just that they released Alonso over this. I think they should have given her. I don't think it's her fault and given her more an opportunity because she's been there before. And they're slowing down the process now. Just let it play out and see how it works in the next film. Don't lay this at her feet is what I'm saying. If the reason was they think that Ant-Man was poorly performing because of visual effects, somebody at Marvel is going to be in more trouble as we go into the next, further into the next set of movies because it wasn't there. That was not the problem.
No, I got you. Lanita Cook, straight out of Kansas City, joins us. Lanita, we're talking about, and welcome to the show. We're talking about the announcement earlier this week. Victoria Alonso, longtime Marvel executive who was fired, seemingly to Charles's point that there's been some friction that's going on within the company. And I agree with Charles. It seems like they're scapegoating Victoria Alonso with all these accusations about she's in charge of production or post-production, and how after Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which performed so poorly, she didn't direct the film and she didn't write the script, but I guess they're blaming it on poor CGI and things of that nature. I was telling Charles she's been with Marvel since 2006, so 17 years. She's been an executive producer on every title in the MCU. And I just felt it was like, wow, that was a shocker this week. What are your thoughts? Because we talked on this show, as I was telling Charles, about the problems with Phase 4 and a bumpy start to Phase 5 for the MCU. Is Alonso the problem, or is letting her go a part of the solution of making this better?
Well, first, thank you so much, Tim and Charles, for having me. It's always a pleasure to join you. This is a very interesting topic. I think, generally speaking, anytime that I think about letting somebody go, especially somebody with so many years in a relationship, whether it's professional, work relationship, whatever, I feel like there's a bunch of things that contribute to it, and a bunch of long running things. And most of them, I think, are probably attitudinal. And so, because when we think about Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and that being the reason for letting anybody go, it would have to be, I agree with you, the writers, um, possibly the director. And the reason I say this is because the trouble with that movie, I felt, was that it was all promotion. It was very little narrative. It was very little creativity. It was all promotion for upcoming um, projects, installations on varying platforms. And I think that's why the movie did not perform the way it needed to. It was one big commercial. And so it didn't elicit any emotion. And the one great part of it, Kang, should not have been, because he's not the star. He's neither Ant-Man nor is he the Wasp, So, and in terms of is this a part of the problem or a part of the solution? I think the problem isn't one person. I think it's the direction that they've decided to take in using their movies strictly as promotional material to service their streamer right. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, either way, I think it's a surprise. And, it's so funny because I remember about 2 weeks ago, and I'm not sure if you were here or not, or maybe we had E-Man on from Chicago, and we were talking about all the problems, man, that Marvel is having at this bumpy start to this phase. And now we've heard word that several months ago, I guess they announced that they moved the Marvels back from, I guess, May to like November. I'm like, hey, I mean, it's so funny, Lanita. We had, I don't know, like maybe 12 or 13 years of just uninterrupted bliss with the MCU. And then suddenly, the pandemic comes, Black Widow and Shang-Chi and the Eternals and all of the content.
Well, I think they're hitting a growth spurt. And oftentimes when we hit growth spurts, they're growing pains. And I think part of what we're seeing is the growing pains. They're trying to move into a new phase. They're trying to produce increase. And so they're gonna have a little bit of trouble. I think that's how it goes just in growth anyways.
So, Lanita, this is one of those stories that we will continue to monitor. And when I say monitor, Victoria Alonso just left the Oscars about a week and a half ago. She was a producer on Argentina 1985 for Best International Film. She's going to be all right, right? She's got a company. She's good. But when I say that we continue to monitor this, I'm talking about with Marvel, because it seems like there are there's some, I wouldn't say they're rocky times ahead, but I just think that when you're up to $28 billion after 30 or 31, movies in a franchise, they've kind of raised the bar. They've set the expectations. And to your point, we're continuing to grow. And I think that after you get out of like what I call the core six, there's no more, in the form of these actors, no more Iron Man, a limited role for Thor, a limited role for the Hulk. Captain America has been transitioned to somebody else. Hawkeye is not there. I mean, it's just so much change. We talked about the loss of Black Panther and how that role will be recast. So there are some decisions that need to be made, as well as trying to figure out how to take all these elements and then incorporate them back into a very workable scheme. And all that bears watching, and we'll see how it comes together. But it doesn't feel to me as smooth as what it was, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
I absolutely agree. For me, the beginning of this troubling phase was when Captain America stepped away, when the actor decided, I'm going to go do other things. I think that's a hard thing to manage. And I think they've been okay. I think taking that character to streaming to monitor and manage that transition was a smart move. But for me, it's like, okay, here's some turmoil ahead. It's coming for us. That's the feeling I got. And then here it is. This is what we see. And then also what we have is Disney Plus. They need to build the streamer and the future of movie watching. I do believe, and hate to say this, but I think it's going to be primarily streaming, and then the movie going experience will be secondary. And so I think now is the time, if they want to continue to be a front runner, that they have to pump up that streamer. And so we're seeing them making that transition from the movie theaters to the streamer, and forcing us through their properties to turn our attention there. And I think that's what we're all feeling.
Well, Charles, I know you grew up as a big fan of these comics and read them and have been watching all these movies over the past now 15 years. So I'll give you the final word, man, to weigh in on, I said it bears watching, man. I know you agree, but give us your concept on why it bears watching and what should we be looking at coming down the line.
Well, I think essentially comic book movies have been going on for so long that it's hard to keep something fresh like this for an extended amount of time. And so we're plumbing the depths of what Marvel has to bring to us, and we can't make it feel any fresher than it has been in the past. So we're going to have, eventually all good things come to an end, and we may be sitting the death knell for some of these comic book movies and some of these franchises as is going forward. Even DC has never been able to do it well like Marvel has been able to do it, and unfortunately they're restructuring at a time when maybe people are just tired of comic book movies. I just saw where one of our good friends in the New York Times is resigning from reviewing movies because of the comic books. The comic book movie is just a juggernaut and has been for the last 15 to almost 20 years. And so, yeah, it's natural things may start winding down, and this is maybe what we're seeing. Don't blame it on Victoria. It's just the way things happen.
No, I got you. All right. Well, I'm going to pivot to the topic of the day. And Lanita, I apologize because when I was sending out homework material or reading material before the show, I forgot to send you the reading material. So I say that because you may not be as prepared unless you are the superwoman that I know you are, and you figured out what the subject matter was and did your own research.
Well, let's just get into it and see. I don't know.
All right. Well, in celebration of Chapter 4 of John Wick, I said today we're going to concentrate on the best sequels. And let me lay down the ground rules, because there was a heated debate in my house about what qualified today as a sequel, right? So Tim Gordon did a tweak to the original show. So a sequel for me is not any film in a franchise, right? It is primarily the second film, right? So for an example, here's a good example. Batman, right? That we've had several iterations of Batman, right? So you've had the Tim Burton Batman with Joel Schumacher in the 90s. Then we had the Christopher Nolan Batman series. And then later on when Zack Snyder put Ben Affleck on screen as Batman, right? So when I talk about a sequel, if we talked about the Batman or the first Batman in 1989, the sequel would have been Batman 2 with Michelle Pfeiffer, right?
Batman Returns, 1992. Yes.
Yeah.
Correct. So if we're talking about Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, where he had Batman Begins, and the second one, of course, would be The Dark Knight. So that The Dark Knight would count, Batman Returns would count. So that's an example. So a sequel wouldn't be Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, because that's the third film in a trilogy. It's not the second film, which would be Twin Towers, which would count. So does that make sense?
Yeah, and
gotcha.
It makes sense, but in honor of John Wick 4, I mean that means it can't be counted in.
Sir, if John Wick is on your list, you better be talking about John Wick 2. Because John Wick 3, Parabellum, and this one wouldn't count in this conversation. Not to say they're not sequels. I'm just saying for the purpose of this conversation, that's kind of how I started. All right. So I'm going to go first and give you my list, and I've got to still take one off because I wanted to do my 10 best sequels, and I have 11 right now, and I was struggling, and I still couldn't figure out which one goes. So at some point during the show, I'm going to eliminate one of these. But before I get to my list, I'm going to start with my honorable mentions. And for the reason I just explained, Mad Max Fury Road can't be on my list because it's like the fourth film in the Mad Max franchise. Lord of the Rings, Return of the King can't be on the list. It's film number 3. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is the third film in Sergio Leone's spaghetti Western trilogy, right? Goldfinger couldn't be on the list because that's the third film in the James Bond franchise. And then the rest of these are all second films, and I just felt that they weren't strong enough to take out the 11 films that I now have, which I have to whittle to 10. And those films are Blade 2, Glass Onion, The Knives Out Mystery, How to Train Your Dragon 2, Blade Runner 2049, Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, X2, Deadpool 2, Kill Bill 2, Volume 2, Kung Fu Panda 2, and finally, The Bride of Frankenstein, which I tried to watch this morning and had to turn it off after 10 minutes because it did not age well at all, right?
But yet still it made your list. Okay.
It made my honorable mention list, but it did not age well.
Okay.
All right, so here we go. Here are the top 10 Tim Gordon sequels with a bonus one that I have to take one out by the end of the show.
Ooh, put it in honorable.
Well, I'm going to take one out. I just can't figure out which one to take out. So I'm going to go from the bottom to the top. In the bottom slot, number 11 right now, The Raid 2, which I think is the greatest action film I may have seen in my entire life. And that's watching John Wick Chapter 4. The Raid 2 is amazing to watch, right? Here's a surprise one, and I rewatched it this morning because I just wanted to make sure that it deserved to be on my list. Hong Kong director Wong Kar-wai's second film in his trilogy, In the Mood for Love. If you haven't seen In the Mood for Love, treat yourself, all right? And you're welcome. Thank you, because I'm doing it for you again. I see Lanita over there writing. Write that one down. All right. The Empire Strikes Back, which is the second film after Star Wars The Last Hope. Toy Story 2.
A New Hope, not Last Hope. A New Hope.
A New Hope. I'm sorry. Star Wars A New Hope. I'm sorry. Did I say A Last Hope?
You did.
Okay, man. Thank you, Charles, for being there to make sure I don't sound like an idiot.
I got to keep you on point, Tim.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I said Toy Story 2. The Dark Knight, of course, Charles knows personally that one's always going to make my list. Aliens made my list. Top Gun Maverick is on the list as a sequel. One of the best, I think, best 2 films I've seen. The Incredibles 2 made my list. Captain America, Winter Soldier, no explanation needed. It is probably the best film in the entire MCU's history. And then Terminator 2, Judgment Day. I literally was watching this on the way out the house this morning. Really good film. It holds up. And number 1, always and forever, Heatwave would say, is Godfather Part 2, which arguably might be a smidge better than The Godfather. That's how good that film is. Oh, it's better. I don't know how much better. Anytime you get a sequel and a prequel, you get Al Pacino, you get Robert De Niro. Come on, man. Francis Ford Coppola. It is probably the best second film on this list in any list you guys will come up with today. So that's where I stand. So who's ready to jump in, be brave, and take on the challenge of the best sequel, not all these other films, but just the second film after a classic film? So like if you wanted to say next Friday, I mean, that would make sense because there was Friday. It's next Friday. If you wanted to say, I don't know. I'm trying to think. Now, technically, Foxy Brown would be the second film because they didn't have franchises for that, and they didn't think of doing a universe for Pam Grier. But that would be the second. That would be Foxy Brown is the sequel to Coffee. in case you didn't know. Pam Grier told me that was one of the things they came up with. All right, so who's going? Should I go ladies first?
Ladies first. Let's let.
Now, are we doing our top 10 here?
Yeah,
I do 10 because I show off and I got advanced movie knowledge. I mean, you can take up the challenge and try to do 10. You can do 5. You can do 3. I just want to find out, what are you thinking when we talk about the best sequel of all time?
Well, when I understood the rules, I had to knock a couple off. For me, I had both Toy Story 3 and 4, so those are coming off. That Toy Story 3, I love that totalitarian and factionism that happens in that movie, which was crazy weird for little kids, and I dug it, right? But I'm taking 3 and 4 off. I wasn't as into 2, so Toy Story's coming off altogether. And then I also have to take off Sam Mendes's Skyfall, because this is one of my favorite sequels. But obviously it's
that's why we laid the rules out at the beginning, because I knew you guys would do some of this stuff.
Yes. But I do have Star Trek Wrath of Khan. I have that on here. Yes. I also like Ocean's 12. I love a good heist movie. I love those cats together, that entire ensemble. So that's on. Batman Returns. It always makes my top Christmas movie list. And so, and I love Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. Meow. Superman 2 from 1980, where I learned of General Zod. I loved this movie. And I see your face, Charles, but I got to tell you, as a young girl, I responded to this idea that somebody would have superpowers and be supernatural and give it up for love, right? To trade that superpower for the power of love, I'm in, right? And so I love that movie. I watched it over and over as a girl. I also said Top Gun Maverick. I think what they did coming back all these years later, just exciting us and delighting us. I think they gave us a better movie than the original. And Terminator 2, Judgment Day is also on my list. Terminator is one of my favorite franchises, except for Genesis. And then my number 1, bum, 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 drum roll, please. I'm with you on The Godfather 2.
That's 2. Oh, and by the way, before Charles gets to go, Charles, Comeback Charleston Blue is an acceptable answer, because that's the sequel to Cotton Comes to Harlem. Another acceptable answer is Let's Do It Again, which is the sequel.
Come on, man.
I'm just saying. I mean, these are acceptable answers. And if you're trying to find something black, Next Friday is an acceptable answer. Hell, if you really want to get technical, Menace to Society could be looked at as a sequel to New Jack City, but not really.
No,
interesting. No. I almost put House Party, not this remake, but
no,
House
you
Party
didn't.
2
House Party 2 was not good.
Oh my goodness, y'all don't understand being a young girl in the 90s, what House Party did. Come on.
Yeah, you were right about that.
All right. So watch this. It sounds like I took one of Charles's, but go ahead, Charles. Let me hear yours.
Look, the only film that I had on my list that was different from the rest of you was Let's Do It Again. I can't believe you just crumbled my list just like that. I had that as my number 10. I also had Star Trek 2. I did have Finding Dory, which the sequel to Finding Nemo. I thought was very well done. And to me, a sequel, if it's a good sequel, it has to surpass what came before. Finding Dory was so good and underrated that I just had to put it on my list. Toy Story 2, Empire Strikes Back, The Dark Knight, Terminator 2, Aliens, Captain America, Winter Soldier, and of course, The Godfather, Part 2.
All right. No, look, strong, Charles. All right, so I got a couple that didn't get any love. Night of the Living Dead came out in 1968, I want to say.
Yeah.
Was this George Romero?
George Romero with Dwayne Jones as the first black dude to really star and be the lead in a horror film. But Dawn of the Dead was the sequel to that, which came out like 1980 something. I don't remember the day or the year. So that was another one that nobody talked about. God, what was I about to say? Because I was trying to find
nobody mentioned Paddington. Paddington 2.
Paddington 2 was one.
It was great. It was great.
Yeah.
You're right about that. Yes.
What about Shaft in Africa? You don't get no love?
Interesting movie. Interesting movie. Yes. Richard Roundtree, a legendary chef. Come on with it.
No, not nowhere is near as good as the first one. Not at all.
Yeah, it does. Like I said, for a good sequel, it has to be better, as good as, or better than the original. And no, not that one.
All right, so
it's a good concept, though. It's a good idea, like to take to say, this is what we're going to do with Blackness. We're going to take you out of the West and we're going to put you back on the motherland. I thought that was an interesting concept. So props for that.
So let's talk a little bit about, I know we've thrown these lists around about these sequels. Each of you, what do you think sequels actually bring to a series? And as we haven't reviewed John Wick Chapter 4 yet, which we'll talk about a little later on in the show. But there's a certain level, if done right, that you kind of lock in with a character, and this character's, 8, 9, sometimes 10-hour arc. So like Lord of the Rings is a good example of a story that was probably one of the few sequels that were done where I think, did they shoot all, I think he shot the entire 3 films over 18 months, if I'm correct, right? And then they just edited them down. So that's one of the rare times that it literally was a journey, not a stop-start like most sequels are done where, hey, Keanu's going to go off and do 2 movies and then come back and do Chapter 3 and then 3 more movies and come back and do Chapter 4, where it's a little choppy. But I think the journey is one of the big things that we get from watching these sequels. What other attributes or what other advantages is it for audiences when we follow a story over and over, or follow the same character with different adventures? And I'll start with you, Charles.
I'm not sure I understand where you're going with this question.
Well, where I'm going with the question is that, for instance, and I'll keep going back to John Wick because that's the one that's out now. We've watched John Wick minding his business. He loses his wife in Chapter 1. They kill his dog in a home invasion, steal his car, and that kickstarts all the action that we've been watching over the last 12 hours or the last 10 hours of John Wick. So what would be an advantage for you, not just as a film critic, but as somebody who's just sitting there buying popcorn, eating candy with your family, watching John Wick's, this huge saga that John Wick has taken us on over the course of, I don't know how many years we've been watching John Wick. Might be close to 10 years, 5 years. I don't know.
Well, I mean, you can use John Wick. I'll use The Matrix as a better example because the movie is so innovative and comes out of nowhere and just gives you something that is just visually exciting. When it comes around for the second version or the next version, you're all in because you want to see not just in Keanu's case, it's not like he's doing a great job of acting, but it's the action and the portrayal of the action that is really important, that you're really bought into. So it's not about the characters. I mean, we understand who John Wick is, we understand who Neo is, but we just want to see, what are you going to bring? What are you going to put on the screen that's going to make me say, oh, this is something I haven't seen before that I just got to keep coming back. And in those cases, that's what we're looking for. It's not about the characters. It's about what are you bringing? What kind of action are we going to see? Stahelski, and I think in this case, Stahelski is the star of the John Wick series. It's not really John Wick. It's what is he bringing? What is he giving us? Am I going to enjoy this? Is it innovative, or is it just the same old stuff all over again? When we had I think we both had Star Trek on our lists. Star Trek 2, we already knew all the characters from Star Trek 1, and we knew the story. I mean, we've had centuries with them, not centuries, decades with them, and now we're getting this new story, which is with characters from the old. And so when you're bringing it all together, it's like, yeah, we're invested in these characters, but what are you bringing us? And so here we have, if you haven't seen it, Khan comes back. It's just amazing. Ricardo Montalban returning to in this role with all. I mean, so it's not always about the story and the characters. It's about what the director is bringing us in the story.
Lanita, I see you smiling over there. What are you thinking?
I think that's a really great take on it. For me, what a sequel is about is a continuing love affair. I think every time that we engage with characters, engage with stories, themes, their messages, what they whisper into us, this is the beginning of a love affair. And we want that sequel so we can have more, just like with any other affair, right? And so this is something that enkindles us. It lights us up. It lights a fire. It boils our passions, right? You know what I mean? It gets us excited. And they do that in many different ways, but we go back because we want to feel that. We want more. That's it. That's it. I don't want to say goodbye yet. You know that feeling. I'm not done. I'm not done. Let's do this again. Let's go on vacation. Right? And so a sequel gives you more time. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that there are some films that we talked about that nobody talked about the sequels. Like nobody talked about part 2 of Jason Bourne. Nobody talked, and you should not have talked about part 2 of The Matrix, because The Matrix peaked at number 1 and went downhill for me after that. There was really, I mean, yeah, the rest of The Matrix was here, and then everything else that The Matrix did was down here. So I'm trying to think if there were any other popular franchises. Like, we didn't talk about James Bond. James Bond, along with the MCU, are two like unicorns of this series, because when you talk about franchises and sequels, Bond, you know, I don't know how many Bond had they had 25 Bonds now, I think, after 50 years, something like that.
I believe
yeah.
it's close to 25.
Yeah, so
do you think because Bond is based on source material? I mean, because the Ian Fleming books are incredible in and of themselves. And so
right.
Laying this groundwork for espionage and as readers being able to enter this exciting world, I think that's why we're able to translate that to screen, because it was already there for them. And the same with Marvel, you know, source material.
I mean, but you know, nobody talked about Iron Man 2. Not really that good.
For a good reason.
Nobody talked about Avengers: The Age of Ultron.
No, here's one. Nobody mentioned the Before Sunset, that series, Julie Delpy's series. Yeah. I mean, I thought they were cute. I thought they were romantic, but it just didn't, it didn't work for me as much as some others.
You know, I'm waiting to fall back in love with Ethan Hawke. Yeah. You know, I'm waiting to fall back in love with Ethan Hawke. Like, I was in love with him in like The Explorers. I've been waiting since his work as an adult. Okay. So, I mean, like you said, it was cute, but it wasn't, let me call back to it. You know, let me put it on a list. Cute, you know. So
but I'm just saying the second film in that series was much better than Iron Man 2. And as far as the series goes, I mean,
yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. Are we missing any other? Nobody talked about Harry Potter.
The Kingsman.
Yep, The Kingsman was another one. Now, yeah, I mean, there are so many of these stories. I was really trying to find how many Black ones that were out there. As a rule, we don't make sequels, apparently, or don't make lots of sequels.
Lethal Weapon.
You can look at Denzel's The Equalizer.
The Equalizer, yeah.
But I mean, you don't really have a lot of sequels. No, not in where we are.
Well,
Beverly Hills Cop.
Well, yeah, that second one was not that good. It was okay. It wasn't nowhere near as good as the first one. Watch this. Coming to America.
No.
Oof, that was not a good sequel at all. Even Shane dropped
that was treachery
in the control room. That was not a good sequel at all, man.
Yeah.
That was one of those times you should have left well enough alone with Coming to America.
It was as big a betrayal of the original as the second Wonder Woman movie. These sequels are just treacherous. Yeah. Is my best word for those.
Yeah, I mean,
well, you have Lethal Weapon, you have Beverly Hills Cop. Those I mean, those are back in the 80s, those were a lot of fun.
But, yeah, I mean, they're two-handers, but I would consider Danny Glover's character in Lethal Weapon a protagonist. He's sharing it with Mel Gibson, of course, but you know.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to move on from that. So, you guys at home, if you play this back, you can get all three of our lists. And I want to thank you guys for jumping in because, I usually write this stuff out, man. I'm ready to go. All right. So we've got about 20 minutes left, man. And before we get out of here, I know we need to review John Wick and have a discussion around that. Before we get there, also coming out this weekend on Amazon is the documentary about Reggie Jackson and his legacy and his life, and it's called simply Reggie. And I watched it this morning. You notice there's a lot of I watch stuff today, right? Did you notice that? Like I watched a little of this. Charles will tell you I have multiple monitors at my house, so while I'm working, I'm watching stuff and I'm able, in my training to pick out just enough or watch what I need in order to come in here and be very fluid in having conversations around this. And I already knew a lot of Reggie Jackson's story, so it was just the validation. Also, Reggie has a special guest in this documentary, Dr. J, who he's been friends with for like 30 years. He also sits down with Henry Aaron. There's conversations with him, with Derek Jeter and Aaron Judge from the Yankees and other folks. So it was a wonderful look at a man who came along and, as a baseball player in the 1960s. He's, kind of that bridge between Jackie Robinson, who had retired and was about to go into the Hall of Fame, and then people like Jim Brown, who was playing football in attitude. So you had Jackie Robinson, who was kind of like told by Branch Rickey to just kind of hold it in, not react. And then you had Jim Brown, who was really, really outspoken, and people like Muhammad Ali during the 1960s. So Reggie Jackson comes into baseball during that time. Of course, he starts off in the minor leagues, and then in the 1970s, he flourishes. He's the best player on an Oakland A team that won 3 straight World Series from 1972 to 1974. He leaves in 1976 when Charlie Finley, who was the owner, wouldn't pay him. He goes to the Yankees. They win the World Series.
Wait. In 76, he went to the Orioles.
He went to the Orioles first, but I overlooked that because he was only there for half a season. So leave it alone, Charles.
He did have the most stolen bases he ever had in his career when he was in that shortened season in Baltimore. And Baltimore was dumb enough not to offer him a contract, and he took off for the Yankees.
So Baltimore was dumb enough not to offer him 5 years and $3 million, what George Steinbrenner offered him.
Exactly. When they received him in trade from the A's, he did not have a contract, and he was looking for that contract, and the Orioles did not offer him a contract, so he took off for the Yankees.
All right. So needless to say, he plays 21 years. He hits 563 home runs. He goes to the Hall of Fame in 1993. All of that stuff is covered, including his frustration with wanting to be an owner. And listen to this was funny to me, despite having in his ownership group 2 of the richest men in the world, and Bill Gates And I mean, yeah, Bill Gates, and what was Bill Gates's partner? Allen, who later bought the
Paul Allen.
Paul Allen. He had Paul Allen and Bill Gates in his ownership group, and they still wouldn't allow him to be an owner in Major League Baseball. So to this day, he's now a special advisor for the Houston Astros, but that still stings. But Reggie is worth the look, man. I just kind of went over the career highlights, but you got to watch it. I thought it was a pretty good documentary. I'd probably give it a B if I had to review it. But I thought it was a pretty good documentary. Did anybody have any insights on Reggie Jackson other than Charles, who tried to come in for a half a season with his favorite team and take some credit for Reggie? he played for the Orioles for a season.
I just want to let you know that Reggie Jackson has a special place in my heart. Being an Orioles fan, I've grown up over the years hating Reggie Jackson and just everything that he stood for, how he continually crushed my team until except for those couple of years where we did overcome and win the World Series ourselves. So that year, the 1977 year when he went from Baltimore to the Yankees, and I'm doing this without I haven't seen the special. I refuse to watch it just because, again, of the hatred that I have for him. When he got swept by the Cincinnati Reds, who won 2 years, this was their second consecutive season winning. I remember dancing in the middle of my parents' family room that Reggie Jackson had lost again. And that the Cincinnati Reds, who my cousin was a big fan of, had overcome the evil empire that was the New York Yankees. So, yeah.
So, Lanita, I'm gonna get away from the shade that Baltimore is throwing out. Reggie Jackson started in Kansas City with the Kansas City A's in the 60s before they went to Oakland. Please let me know if you have any warm memories of Mr. October, unlike our shady friend Charles.
I am going to tell you, this has all been an education for me. I am newly learning about sports and sports figures. I know who they are once they cross over to acting. But as a sports fan, I am very superficial, incredibly superficial. So I don't get deep-witted, that kind of thing. But I do want to watch the documentary, even though you might give it a B. It sounds like something that I would like because it covers the span of a career. It helps us understand the trajectory, particularly in the time where he entered the game, where he entered the sport. And this thing that you bring up is very interesting about wanting to be an owner rather than an employee and having to get permission from a collective of people and not being able to get that permission for whatever reason or the other. So I'm very interested in the documentary for that reason.
All righty. Well, let's get to, before I say that, Reggie is on Amazon Prime. So if you get an opportunity this weekend, it's starting the 23rd, you should be able to watch this documentary. So, all righty. And let's get to the big one today, which of course is, Chapter 4. John Wick. Wow, that's all I can say. Let me set it up first, and we got about 12 minutes, so I'm going to get into this. John Wick is a neo-noir action thriller directed by Chad Stahelski and written by Shay Hatten. Yes, whatever you just said, man. I'm bad at the name production, man, but thank you. It is the sequel to John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum and the fourth installment in the John Wick franchise, and stars Keanu Reeves as the title character alongside a supporting ensemble cast, including Donnie Yen, Bill Skarsgård, Lawrence Fishburne, oh my God, Hiroyuki Sanada. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Shamir Anderson. What?
Close enough.
Lance Riddick in one of his final roles, and Ian McShane. And the film looks at John Wick, who uncovers a path to defeating the High Table, but before he can earn his freedom, Wick must face off against a new enemy with powerful alliances across the globe and forces that turn old friends into foes. 2 hours and 50 minutes of one of the best action thrillers that I have seen in a long, long time that didn't feel like 2 hours and 50 minutes. John Wick, man, going in, it was so funny because I remember talking to some people close to me. I said, we already know what it's going to be. Wick's going to continue his journey. Lots of people are going to die. There's going to be lots of bullet shots to the head, etc. But what they did in this film, which I thought was really interesting, is that they took almost what I would call a fast and furious route, right? So they've been doing it over the last 2 or 3 films. I just hadn't paid attention. But it was like, how many creative ways can we come up with for John Wick to punish people? So, we had the famous scene in the stable a couple of years ago where he had a fight and he would smack the horse in the backside and the horse would kick somebody in the face. There was the fight scene or sequence they choreographed where he was in this gun museum, and he's pulling guns out and shooting people. This one has a scene where people a fight scene in the middle of I don't remember what they called it in the film, but like a circular, circular parkway somewhere over in France where people are getting thrown into moving cars. I just thought it was funny. I sat there and spent the majority of the movie doing this. Damn. Ooh.
It's the circle at the Arc de Triomphe.
Thank you, Charles. So that was an interesting scene. He had another sequence where I think he had to go up 222 steps. And so that was fantastic. I love this movie, man. I think that, they give us enough politics in order to kind of move the story along. But the politics is a disguise to give us all the action, and adding Donnie Yen into this film along with, what's the gentleman who played with Donnie Yen was the character who was the blind character, Shamir Anderson, Mr. Nobody. I thought the additions of those 2 characters along with his dog. So of course we don't have Halle Berry's 2 dogs from Parabellum, but a dog does come back in this film. I love this movie, man. I think it's one of the best films of the year. And when we talk about the movie business right now, where you need people to have an excuse to go back to the movies, John Wick Chapter 4, you just watch it at home. You have so much fun watching this movie on the big screen. This movie, it demands you to see it in all of its splendor. I don't even have a grade, but just like huge thumbs up, man. John Wick Chapter 4 is outstanding. Lanita, talk to us about this film.
So let me tell you something. I was such a fan of the original. I loved that simple concept. You killed my dog, I'm coming for all y'all. Like, I loved it. And then what we got thereafter was just a slaughterhouse, just a stream of bodies. And it was just such a great high octane time. I think they delivered that in this one as well. I will say, if I were making this movie and trying to make it congruous with the original, this is not the movie I would have made. So as a standalone movie, it is exciting. It infuses it with humor, that those 200 stairs, straight comedy, right? And and I think they do something, but I think they do something in this movie that they didn't do in the first one, and that's try to give it weight, try to give it depth, try to give it dimension. And so this is something, I think, a different movie than I would have expected from that original. Now, the middle 2 movies, I know people like the second one. I did not like the second one, and I certainly didn't like the third one. But this one I love. The fourth one I love. Yeah, I love this one, except it feels like it doesn't belong in a franchise with the original. And I'm going to tell you one specific reason why. That first movie had something in it for me, which I understood that the first one felt very first shooter player game, like for video game players, but it still was, it had that hand-to-hand choreography that was very powerful, that I love, somebody who just loves action movies. This fourth one abandons the person who just likes action movies and feels like it's only for a person who's sitting around 4, 5, 6 hours playing video games. That's what it felt like for me.
All right, Charles, we got about 5 minutes left, man. So let us know what you think.
All right, to an extent, I agree with Lanita. There is an opulence, a grandeur to this film that doesn't exist in the films that precede this one, where the other ones, I think you're correct to call them neo-noir. They're very flat and they're very basic. This movie has a depth to it that doesn't exist. So I think it's the best of the 3 sequels, but I still have a love for the first one that just can't be topped. So, and I think you're also right in that the complaint again about the John Wick series has been that it's like a video game and like a first person. I think Stahelski actually sometimes in this film presses into that criticism and actually uses it and says, "Oh, you want to see a video game? I'll show you what a video game looks like." So there's a one scene where he just like, "Okay, I'm all in on that criticism, and I'm just going to show you what you really want to see." And so I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was the best of like I said, the best of the sequels. I miss Halle Berry. I don't know how Lanita's hating on Parabellum, because I think that's the next best one of the 3 sequels. But again, there's some work that happens in here. I can't imagine stuntmen allowing to happen to them. So it's just crazy about the amount of action. Like you mentioned, the steps up to Sacré-Cœur, I enjoy, and you don't really see a scene like this in any of the other films, like the majestic scene of the Sacré-Cœur, which is the famous cathedral in France, the Arc de Triomphe Circle, then the Osaka scenes. It's just a great big opulent finish to this franchise, and I do believe that this is the end of the franchise. So if I give it 2 thumbs up, I think I gave it an A- as a grade. It's just a really good film at a really dull time of the year for movies.
Well,
do I have time to address what he said?
Yes, but let me say this first. It's not the end of the franchise. I'm just letting you know. So don't even think. John Wick 5 will be back. Trust me. But go ahead, Lydia.
So what I wanted to say about Parabellum is, for me, the reason why I had a problem with the movie is, it's John Wick, so it's fine. But it felt like with Halle Berry, they were like, "Hey, I got this friend Halle, and she needs to come back after being away for so long. Can we give her something in this?" That's what it felt like with her. And the reason why I wanted to address it is because we talked about Mr. Nobody, and he has a dog. I think the dog is distracting because you think the entire time, is he related to Halle Berry's character in Parabellum? And then also the dog is a little bit more interesting than he is.
A lot more interesting, I would say.
Dog has more personality. I feel you.
We mentioned Halle Berry's character. I mean, they are fleshing out a movie for her. They're also fleshing out Ballerina, which is based on another character that out of Parabellum. And there's the Peacock series on the Continental that's out. So John Wick is not gone. There may be a 5. I don't think so, but there's plenty of opportunities for us to see John Wick somewhere else in the future.
Yes, sir.
But what you just said, Charles, you were talking about the blueprint for the future of movie promotion. The same thing we're talking about with Marvel and them using movies to push us toward their streamer. This is what they're going to use this for, to push us toward Peacock. Absolutely.
Yep. Absolutely.
All righty. All right. Well, thank you guys for that. John Wick is in theaters this weekend. You see my face. I got to get back in there and check it out again. And it sounds like Charles and Lanita want to go back and check it out again. Lanita, tell people where they can read your content.
Well, you can find me at blackbeebuzz.com. That's BLACKBEEBUZZ.com. And you can find me on Instagram at Lonita Cook. All
right. And Charles Kirkland.
You can read me at thefilmgordon.com, and I'm also at the DC Film Life on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, and I am Tim Gordon. Just Google me. Put Film Critic behind it. You'll get everything you need. On behalf of my two colleagues, I want to thank both of you guys. And as we tell you, see something good at the movies. If I were you, I'd have a ticket for John Wick Chapter 4. You're not going to get better than that this weekend. And as I said, we'll see you guys on the other side. You guys enjoy your weekend. You guys take care.